Welcome, Winsome. Thank you very much for showing enmesh in the gallery. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's been great gallery.
Yeah, great pleasure. I met you with Esteban and Misha in your studio, excuse me, last May, and I was so taken by your work. I'm delighted to be able to have your show here. I wondered if you could talk about why enmesh.
Ooh, so enmesh. I suppose because my work is about the natural world, it's about how we impact on it. But I also sometimes when I'm out bush, get the sort of weird feeling that things are talking to each other. Plants are talking to each other, and I had an exhibition called Chatter, which was sort of about that, and it just keeps coming up and developing from there. And the fact that I love reading, and so a couple of things like the atomic theory of the world, that the world is actually granular, and so from a Greek philosopher, hundreds of years BC. So that everything's made of little atoms shimmering and moving, and we're all made of the same stuff. So we have to be enmeshed, we have to be connected. So that's sort of, where it came from.
And are the plants talking to you as well?
Ah, yes. Yes, the plants always talk to me, and I talk to them. In a lot of ways, so often just as a papermaking resource, but then as plants in danger, so plants that are facing fierce bushfires through gamba grass and introduce which is now a noxious weed, which I love using to make paper. And then I think too that in the artworks, because the fibres have come from plants, that then I'm giving the plants a voice as well. So I'm a plant person, I'm not a person.
So let's talk about the process that you use to give these plants a voice in your artwork. It's
a long process because I start right at the beginning to make my own material or substrate for the work. And so I have to think first about what a body of work is going to be about, or sort of a basic theme or something for the work, and then think about what sort of papers I'm going to need, or whether the papers can add an extra element to the work. So if it was I'm thinking of doing some work on mangroves, so then I would go and do some research on plants in the mangroves. I know that I can dye with mangrove bark, so I dye the paper, whether I can use any fibres to make paper. So that adds another element into the work. And so it starts there. Then I have to go and source the fibres, which I love, so just going bush collecting, and then often I'll sit out there and prepare. So prepare them for cooking. Then I have to boil the fibres in an alkaline solution for a couple of hours. Then rinse them, so to a neutral pH. And then I beat them, and I've got a big Hollander beater. But I try to do this, try and source all my materials in the wet season, because everything's growing, there's rain, constant rain, and I hate wasting water, and so I often rinse fibres in rainwater. I collect buckets of rainwater, and I like using green fibre, even if I've just prepared it and cooked it, and then I freeze it for the dry season. So it's seasonal as well, which is sort of also responding to the environment, which I really like. It's just immersion, really, enmeshing. I'm enmeshed.
Your work has such fine detail that it draws you in to actually look at the detail. Is that reflective of the molecules and atoms that you'd like to see and that you do see in nature?
Yes. And now this body of work started out a little bit more literal with the imagery of mainly pandanus in this one, but then it suddenly got a bit more abstracted and molecular, which is sort of where I'd like to go. So I'm always pushing paper and the idea a bit further. I get bored very quickly. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where these go, but that is sort of the idea, the breakdown.
Because the two behind you, the one just over your left shoulder was the beginning of this show, and the one on the other wall is the end of the body of work. So it's reflective of what you just said, of moving from including the pandanus grasses, aren't they?
Yeah. And so, yeah, and then sort of also too, I just want to get out of the square or rectangular picture frame. And yes, so next I think they might get bigger. Though I could go small, I haven't done small for a long time, but I always see bigger and hanging layers, so a bit more installation-y. I'd like to do the next one, but we shall see.
There's a lot of layering in this artwork. Do you want to just talk about those different layers and the relationships between the two?
Yes. Well, I love the layers, and the layering starts when I'm making the paper. So I get as many ideas into the paper as I can before it's even dry. So the layering begins in the wet sheet. So I add watermarks, ochres, pulp painting, as many elements as I can that will enhance the work. And then, because it's such a tactile medium, adding the layers afterwards. So a lot of these works are like 2 or 3 layers, and that's not including what's happening underneath. And the other thing I do is I stitch these I stitch papers together, so they're like 2 different papers that I might have printed earlier, and then I'll just hand stitch them together. But these sort of mesh cut out things, I stitch those on as well, which I just find, I don't know, something to do with mending.
It's very meditative, isn't it?
Stitch. Yeah.
Is there a surprise when you make your own paper that things evolve that you didn't expect and you think, oh, look at that, and that was a surprise?
Always, and that's part of what pushes me forward. So if I haven't quite got an idea for what I want to do next, I will just make paper, and I'll just start making plain sheets, which I just hate doing, it's boring. And from there, something will go, like some accident might happen, splash something, fold something, doesn't, and that from that, a new idea will develop. And so, yeah, this paper is a medium that, I don't know, I don't think there's any boundaries. And so that's, what I'm exploring.
These are very new for you, I think. Are they?
The buildings, I did an installation where I used these similar pulp painted buildings, just darkly hung on a wall, juxtaposed with, I make pulp painted vines. So there was a huge wall of vines, and then the wall of the buildings. What else did I? Oh, and I had incense that smelled of bushfires, and I tried to make a sort of oil that you could burn or heat that was meant to smell like rain. falling on ground. It sort of did, it really did. But yeah, now I've come back and revisited them, and I just love the graphic image of the building sort of shapes overlaid with all the sort of natural disintegrating cellular molecular world imagery. Because, yeah, parts of this, I don't know, I just think of space. Because another body of work, and some of these plates come from that one, was when they found gravitational waves and that things in the universe, nothing's solid. And so if something happens in one part of the universe, you'll feel it in another because of the waves that it makes. And that was, I don't know when that was found. Anyway, it's pretty amazing. But I suppose my work, I want it to be beguiling, but say something. And these are like that, I suppose.
I'd love you to talk to the actual process of your mark making, because it's very detailed. What are you doing here?
Yes. So, to get the imagery in each work, I've used dry point, so printmaking. So I use, and I don't follow rules in printmaking, so I use dry point in perspex, or I use a plastic called high impact styrene. And I'm constantly trying to find what sort of marks I can make in them. And so I use a Dremel, and I use the perspex for the really detailed marks. So this is like contours. And I just sit with a Dremel and make the marks in the perspex forever. And so both of these are using a Dremel, so that dot plate as well is using a Dremel. The high impact styrene is a softer plastic, and it tends to melt. And so when you use the Dremel, it heats up, and then you splatter bits of plastic on the edges of your lines, which hold beautiful ink and make really lovely marks. I also use sandblasting. So I've got a sort of little sandblast gun, I use that at the back, and I use wax as a resist for the sandblasting, so I can get a sort of like an aqua tint. I use solvents, so Carby Cleaner, Orange Power. I find anything that'll eat into the plastic to melt it so you can carve into it or emboss into it. So yes.
And I watched you create the outer layer with pulp, which was really intriguing, the way that you made that. So the other artwork on this wall has got some pulp overlay.
These?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yes. So these meshes, well, I'm calling them meshes, are drawn by hand with paper pulp, and a lot of these are gamba grass. And what I do is lay a big curtain mesh out on my concrete studio floor, and I've got a squeeze bottle of pulp thickened with methyl cellulose, and then an office chair, and I just roll back and forwards on the office chair and draw these shapes, or these on the floor. And then the hard part then is to peel it off. And then once I've peeled it off, what I do is lay it on a print. So that might have gone on top of that. So I've got that as the positive print, but that's left a negative space. So that's been really good fun to play around with that as well.
Because you leave a lot of negative space in your artwork so that they breathe, it looks to me.
Yes, yes. And I love making holes, like on purpose. So some of them, like this one, it's just got the holes in the paper, so I did that while it was being made. in the mould and decor. Adding things in, they're hard to see there. Oh, this one's got ochres in it and some mud from Carl's Crossing. Which,
Carl's Crossing.
I know. I was very careful, sort of had my... So the crocodiles wouldn't get me. Had to be really quick.
You do have to be very timely on that crossing.
Yeah, so...
Lovely. And where to from here? You spoke about maybe going very big or very small. I imagine going small might be a challenge to contain you a bit.
Small would be a challenge, but I'd really like to try it.
How small would you go?
I'd like to try really small and just, and maybe pare it right back. And the other thing I want to do, I don't enjoy printmaking. I mean, do I? I'm just getting over printmaking. I'm getting over ink under my fingernails and wiping it on and wiping it off. What's the point? No. And so what I've started experimenting with, particularly in the Perspex plates where I can get a deeper mark with the dream on, is printing with paper pulp. So instead of using ink, I've worked out a way of beating the pulp quite fine, mixing it with methyl cellulose and pushing it into the plate like you would ink.
Do you let it dry and then take it out of the plate?
No, and then I run it through the press as you would.
Emboss it.
And it prints the paper onto the paper ink onto the paper. So and I've done it dry, using dry paper, but I have also printed ink onto paper that's just come out of the press, so it's still wet, hasn't dried since it was made. And the ink beds right into the paper, doesn't sit on the surface. It's really interesting. So I might try the same with the paper printing. But anyway, more experiments.
Watch this space.
Watch this space.
Maybe watch this gallery. You might show some of those back here.
I might, yes.
So thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. What a privilege, as I say, to have you at Timeless Textiles. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's been wonderful.